ketogenic diet. You heard me talk about intermittent fasting. What you don't know about me is I have done fitness competitions, and I have done macronutrient diet, meaning counting macros. I have done low fat diets. I have done high protein diets. And not because I'm some crazy, I don't know if that's even like a eating disorder. I don't want to scare anyone, but mostly because I have a genuine interest in nutrition and nutrition science and what different foods do to the body. You know, we can read about how oranges are high in vitamin C and how you need vitamin C and it's water soluble, so you need it daily. But how does that feel if you have too low of vitamin C or too high? And how does your body function on a higher protein diet or a lower fat diet, etc.? What you're going to learn over the course of this podcast is the fact that your body is going to probably function differently than your best friend, and it's going to respond differently to different diets. Now, that goes above and beyond your body and how it responds. Now we layer in schedules, work, family, what your kids will eat. I mean, you know, it goes layers and layers deep of what you're actually capable of doing for yourself nutritionally. And because this is my job, I've had the luxury of testing different kinds of diets and different ways of eating on my body, and really tracking that and being able to speak to that then well. So I see a few people hopping on here. Please know that over the course of this broadcast, you can do a couple of things. One, if you're watching on YouTube, you can type in a comment or a question. I'd be happy to get back to you. On Facebook Live that you see here, you can type in the comments if you have questions. I will present a different information first, and then I will try to get to your comments and questions toward the end. If a question pops up that's real specific to what I'm talking about, I will definitely try to answer it as we're going and layer it into the presentation. If you're listening to this on a podcast, please message me, either direct message me on iTunes. There's something called Podbean if you're listening to it there. Most importantly, if you love what you're hearing, please share this with your friends and your family. Give me a review on iTunes. Let other people know if you love it. And what I've found is anytime I come up with a great podcast or I find a great one that it just has information I know a friend could use, whether it's from mine or from someone else's, it's so easy just to send it nowadays via text or email. So please consider doing that. Share this with your friends and your family. Okay, so let's look back on, I mean, if you're, 20 years old or older, you remember some of the low-fat dieting craze. And that was early in the 90s, working all the way up into the 2000s. And I've spoken about that before when we talk about, on my last podcast, where it was cutting the calorie confusion, where because of a low-fat diet craze, everything was about low fat or no fat. And as a result of that, we ended up adding in more chemicals and unfortunately adding in more sugar to make up the components of the food. For example, yogurt. When you took a full-fat Greek yogurt and skinning it down and made it fill in the blank brand and cut the fat out of it, most people wouldn't enjoy eating that. It would taste like a very sour, very thin sour cream. So instead, fruits and fruit sugars were added. And then, of course, we had an excess of corn. So high fructose corn syrup was added to that. And so now we got this cocktail of mostly sugar and a little bit of calcium, magnesium thrown in. Well, it was pitched as a high calcium, good for you food, but unfortunately it was so high in sugar that all of that sugar offset any of the benefits you gained from the added calcium and even the little bit of protein that maybe remained. So anytime we've gone through these extremes in dieting over the course of millennia, really, we end up with the highs and the lows, the goods and the bads that come from it. Now you're hearing and learning more about the ketogenic diets and ketogenic supplements and even intermittent fasting from me and from other researchers and educators. And if you don't read up on it and follow it specifically, it's going to feel like another fad or trend. And I'm here to tell you that the human body hasn't changed, but the researchers and therefore research certainly has. I've been reading a book lately called Own the Day, Own Your Life. I'll get that in there. It's by Aubrey Marcus. And he has a quote in here about research. And what ends up happening, it's in the second chapter, what ends up happening with research is the people doing the research, they come across something that they find really not only interesting but helpful for the medical community, right? Well, God, if we could cut saturated fats and that cuts and reduces cholesterol, boom, we're on to something. So then the research, because that person's job and that person's initial message relied on, for lack of a better way of describing it, relied on that person being right, relied on their research, their entire career being that message. And they built on it and built on it. And research doesn't necessarily change. What does change is the researchers. And now we're seeing really a transition around what research is being done and who's doing the research. And I believe that people in the science community, researchers, they're looking for solid evidence. They're not looking to create, a trend or a craze to the public. So I firmly believe that the low-fat dieting that we were doing in the 90s was meant to be, I think people really believed, and the researchers that said it believed that it was right in lowering cholesterol. And the people that are suggesting higher fat diets and lower proteins today believe that it's right because the research has shown it. So what do you do? I mean, what do you do? How do you sift through all that craziness in really finding the diet that's right for you? And my undergraduate work is in nutrition. My master's degree is in human performance. And over the course of 20 years, I have just felt this passion around learning and educating myself more and more around nutrition. And as a result of that, I did a course, oh my gosh, it was probably 5 years ago now, from the Institute of Transformational Nutrition. One of the things that we did was we studied over 1,000. I have a binder with pages and pages of all the different diets, over 1,000 different diets that have been, let's call it over the course of 2,000 years, that people have followed, and what worked, what didn't, who it was for, who it wasn't. And so really as a result of that study, I definitely have applied different diets for different people. I would be the last person to tell you that everyone should do keto or everyone should do low fat or everyone should do intermittent fasting. I definitely have strong beliefs around one or the other and why, and I'll get to that. But it's important to note that your body is really a work in progress, right? And any given day, based on the sleep you had, based on the amount of water you had, the humidity outside, the temperature outside, the amount of stress you have on you physically, emotionally, mentally, all of that, your activity level, that all has a factor in your current diet. And then the foods that you give your cells and feed your body and fuel your body with, then send a message to your body on what to do with that. And we're all very different for all of the reasons I noted earlier. If you look at that 1,000+ diets that I've studied, and then all of the books, I have some of them here. I wanted to show you just some of, I don't even know if I'd call them my favorites. I'm sitting here staring at a stack of books that I've looked at over the course of the years, and every single one of them have nuggets of information that I think are valuable. You just have to be able to look at maybe where it works for you, what works for you and what doesn't. And I'll get to how you're gonna do that. But Practical Paleo. I mean, this was one of my first introductions to a paleo diet, and this is by Diane Sanfilippo. Love her. Simply Keto is a newer cookbook. This was a woman that lost weight, a significant amount of weight using the ketogenic diet. And these are more recent diet and nutrition experts. Some of the older ones, we're gonna go way back. Okay, I'm gonna bring it way back to something called Nourishing Traditions. Nourishing Traditions was something that I looked into when I was working at a place called The Marsh in Minnetonka, Minnesota. And in that time, I was, 22, 23 years old, and coming into an environment that was all, older members, certainly. Our average membership, I think, was 60+, and people coming in with autoimmune diseases and inflammation. And one of the dietitians I work directly with, her name is Carolyn Denton. She taught me something so profound. I had never ever worked with an elimination diet. An elimination diet, many of you guys know this, truly Whole30 is based on this elimination diet, this process of elimination where you remove any possible allergens, any possible inflammatory foods, corn, sugar, dairy, wheat, or gluten. And when you eliminate all of that, you scrub it all back, and then you clean your foods really well to remove any insecticides or pesticides, you're left with lean proteins and vegetables and fruits, okay? And you'd work with that for a while, and then when you add a food back in, like dairy, you measure how your body responds to it. And working with Carolyn Denton and seeing people lose weight, reduce inflammatory symptoms, get off medication for their inflammatory or autoimmune disease. That was profound to me, and they did that specifically with nutrition, okay? And that was 20 years ago, okay? I believe they were some of the first people that taught me that, but in working with them and learning from them, one of the books that I followed was Nourishing Traditions. Nourishing Traditions is by Sally Fallon. She and Mary Enig, who is a PhD in nutrition, worked together on this. I have the second edition, so I'm going to look at when this was published. This was published, it was redone in 99. Prior to that, I believe, was 1994. So this was just when I was coming out of high school and college and graduate school, and it was looking at really taking our foods and stripping things back and nothing processed. And what were the whole foods that our bodies needed? Try to get in the camera for you. Nourishing Traditions is, I mean, some of the stuff in here is crazy. You'll read it and think, well, I'm not going to do that. But I remember thinking making your own bone broth was weird 20 years ago. Well, now you make yourself a bone broth powder and sell it at a Whole Foods store, and you're probably making millions. Okay, so making bone broth was right in Nourishing Traditions. None of this stuff is terribly new. Well, then fast forward 10-ish years, and you've got the South Beach diet where it was about high protein. Fast forward a few more years, and you've got the Atkins diet. I mean, seriously, you guys, I have all of these books. And the Atkins diet was really more like ketogenic diet, where it was looking at high fat, moderate protein, and very low carbohydrate. The difference, to my understanding, with the Atkins diet was it was more high protein and high fat. And in that sense, different from a ketogenic diet. We'll get to that. And we get to the 2010-ish, and we're looking at things like the Whole30. So in my experience of 20 years, I feel like we've come full circle. Elimination diets, low fat, high protein, South Beach, high fat, high protein, Atkins, ketogenic, we're looking at a ketosis, simply keto and ketogenic diets, and then we're into Whole30 and looking at real foods again. So what do you do? What does your body need? I have personally worked with clients and coached them through low-fat diets, and it worked for them. I've personally worked with clients on ketogenic diet, and we do ketogenic diets specifically via intermittent fasting, and it's worked for them. I've also worked with clients that have done intermittent fasting, and it didn't work for them, okay? And I also know why. And I had to adjust their cardio and adjust their total caloric intake. And really what it came down to was them working with a professional allowed them to make some subtle adjustments to what they were taking in. They weren't just, throwing darts at a dartboard and guessing and doing one thing one day and another thing the next day and constantly shifting and changing. That doesn't work ever. So what do you do? Okay, what can you do? Well, first and foremost, I highly recommend reaching out to a nutrition professional, whether that's a nutrition coach. I work with a couple of nutrition coaches that specialize in Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism. Reach out to me if you want their name. I will give that to you. And I work with a number of dietitians that specifically focus on the elimination diet, and that's worked really well for them. There are a couple of companies that are doing testing, genetic testing, to help you determine exactly what your genes tell you you should be eating. Sounds so much easier, doesn't it, than just guessing and trying different diets and hoping to God you're doing them right. There are two companies. One draws blood, and they'll look at what your well, there's actually two companies that work with this. One that draws blood and looks at that, the other that does a cheek swab and will come back and tell you exactly what you need as far as balance of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And then there's a company now that I'm researching that does a wearable device that will tell you based on what they're reading off of your wrist and sensing through your skin and sensing through like a daily continuous bloodstream rate, they're able to tell you what your genetics are for nutrition. Those are all really new, profound ways to get a better individualized answer on what you should be eating. I've always told you guys this. I'm a huge advocate for researching something first and then sharing it with my clients and customers. So the two companies that do a blood draw and a cheek swab and the one company that does the wearable, I'm still researching those and testing those. So I'm not ready to give them my, vote of confidence yet. So I will definitely get back to you on that. In fact, sounds like a good podcast topic, doesn't it? Which wearables, which testing companies work the best and why? And I will get back to you on that. Sorry to leave you hanging on that one, but all right. For you right now, these are a few tools that you can use to determine the diet that's best for you. First and foremost, you need to use some sort of tracking mechanism for at least 2 weekend days and 1 weekday, where you're tracking exactly what you eat. I am talking 0 cheats, people. 0 cheats. Just write down exactly what you had. If you wake up at 5 in the morning and you're just famished and you grab a couple of chocolate chips out of the pantry, you're gonna have to write that down, okay? All of it counts. Ideally, when you're eating these items. Now you might wonder, which app do you use, Jody? Which one is your favorite? And I don't have it in front of me, but my very favorite is called Fat Secret. It's Calorie Counter by Fat Secret. I don't know why I love this app more than MyFitnessPal. It's just extremely simple. Once you've typed in a couple of foods, it always pops up for you as a possibility, because if you're anything like the majority of people I work with, you tend to eat the same foods all the time. And of course, as you're typing something in, because they have such a large database, often the foods just pop up. For example, I love Lundberg Farms brown rice cakes. I start typing in brown rice and brown rice cakes pop up, or brown rice steamed pops up, and then I can search my brand. So super easy to work with. It's called Calorie Counter by Fat Secret. So I recommend that. It's gonna give you a macronutrient breakdown. It's gonna give you your calories, of course, and then by macronutrients, I mean your carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And you're gonna get a picture of that. Those 2 weekend days and 1 weekday is gonna give you a pretty good idea of what you typically eat. And you'll notice that your calories probably go up and down. Most people don't have the same exact caloric count every single day, just like you probably don't burn the same amount of calories every single day. Therefore, you need less calories, less fuel, different kinds of fuel every single day. What do you do with that though? Okay, that is where you share that with a nutrition coach, a personal trainer that has a study and undergraduate within nutrition, someone that is certified to help you take those numbers and break it down based on what your goals are and what kind of diet you should do based on your lifestyle and your current eating habits. Doing a fitness app of any sort, MyFitnessPal, Fat Secret, and just looking at those numbers by yourself and just tracking them, I guess, for no other purpose than just to see how many calories you take in. I have this analogy that I think is hopefully this speaks to you. It's kind of like having a heart rate monitor, but not knowing where your anaerobic threshold is, or what your heart rate training zones are, or what your goal is. So I remember, I'm gonna throw my sister under the bus here for a second. Sorry, sister, but My sister got a heart rate monitor and she was like, okay, so I got this heart rate monitor and I'm doing the elliptical and my heart rate's 148. Is that good? I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what 148 is for you. It's aerobic. Is it anaerobic? Are you pushing yourself and doing intervals? How long are you there? So what those numbers are, they don't mean anything to you until you have things tested, until you're given guidance on what heart rates you should be training at. So no different than a food blog or a nutrition app of some sort. The numbers don't do that much for you unless you know exactly what your goal is and what you're working toward. Okay, so hopefully that message is really clear. Get an app first. Spend 2 weekend days and 1 weekday and just really be honest with yourself and that future coach that you're gonna work with, okay? The second step is taking a day and just continue eating as normal and look at what times you eat, what times you go to bed, what times you wake up, and how you feel. Now for some, that can just be a simple journal where they're writing all of those things down, the food, the timing, and how they feel. Don't discount your energy fluctuations throughout the day. And again, look at a couple of weekend days and a weekday to really determine the highs and lows of your energy, because we're looking at big picture, not necessarily, I was on this diet and I felt really good, but how did you feel after? Could you sustain it, etc. So really important to note how you feel. What other symptoms do you have? Do you get a headache? Do you sleep well? Do you sleep horribly? How's your digestion? Did you have a good digestion in the morning after your cup of coffee? What were your stools like? We're gonna get real personal now, but were your stools hard, rocky, smooth, diarrhea? I mean, and anything and everything in between, okay? Was your urine clear? Were you hydrated? All of those things would be really great to know, really great for a nutrition and fitness professional to know. And they can guide you better with that information. You personally, just from a common sense standpoint, might start seeing some trends like, gosh, it's funny, anytime I have this in the morning, by like 10 o'clock I'm famished. Or anytime I have this in the morning, I feel really good until like 11 or 12. I don't even need anything, I have great energy. Well then, no textbook or person is gonna tell you that you're wrong. You're going by truly how you feel, okay? Aside from all of those little tools and tracking devices, we have to look at taking one variable at a time, okay? If you try to go from eating normally, which whatever that may be, to suddenly going on a ketogenic diet, adding in exercise, and completely changing the types of foods you eat and when you eat them, there's so many variables that are changing that it's difficult to know what was good, what was helpful, and what was not. I'm working with a client right now that she is doing, I would consider it more of a ketogenic diet, but mostly that she's adding in bulletproof coffee. She's doing more high fat, so she's got saturated fats from MCT oil, saturated fats from the butter, and eliminating and significantly reducing sugars. Well, cholesterol has gone up. Total cholesterol has gone up. LDLs have gone up. HDLs have gone up. Triglycerides have gone up. Anyone else would see that and completely freak out and think, that diet is horrible. I can't do that. Well, when we dig a little deeper, we understand that the bigger picture is she has some underlying inflammatory diseases. I won't go into detail on which things she has so that we don't put pieces together and know who I'm talking about, but it's important that we look at our overall health and how our body's responding. That cholesterol measurement is simply a snapshot of where she's at right now. And what you might find is going on or changing your diet, I should say, but in this case, she's going on a higher fat, lower sugar diet. Initially, her body saw an inflammatory response, number one. And number two, she still has fats that are undigested in her liver that need to be metabolized and worked out. So you're gonna see that in the blood as an increase in cholesterol. So I want you to look at your diet as a work in progress and as a way to say, okay, I'm gonna do one thing. I'm gonna change one thing. I'm gonna do it for anywhere, from 2 to 7 days. So you're looking at a couple of days to a week. Be patient with yourself and follow those steps, write them down. And then add a new habit. The one baseline nutrition, and I guess one thing that all researchers and doctors can agree on is that eating more vegetables is always a good idea. Eating less sugar is always a good idea. Eating more healthy fats, always a good idea. Looking at protein that is not charred and cooked so heavily that it's burnt on the outside, just from a cancer risk standpoint. Having fish, chicken, beef, poultry, all of those, and pork, all of those items, and balancing that. Many of you know that I follow a 40-30-30 plan. I do 40% protein, 30% carbs, 30% fat. Some people do that on the flip where they do 40% carbohydrates. I personally do 40 protein, 30 carbs, 30 fats. That has been the thing that has worked the best for me. It allows me to enjoy the foods that I love and to have a body composition and an energy that I'm happy with. So I want you to be able to find yours, to find that sweet spot for you where you're spending time making dinner and enjoying foods with your family and your friends, where you're eating foods that you actually enjoy, and you're seeing the results of that, whether that be from weight loss, an increase in energy or focus. What you shouldn't have is something that is just painful, that you cannot sustain. Whenever I tried to do a ketogenic diet and followed it exactly the way that I've read in all the textbooks and such, I didn't like just how it even felt in my mouth. It was my palate. It felt like so much fat, even though I was doing a lot of vegetables too. So ketogenic diet did not work well for me. Even if I lost weight from it or was extremely lean from it, I wasn't going to sustain that. It wasn't the way I wanted to eat to feel good in my life. So I want to encourage you to consider and look at the link that I'll post a little bit later about fast camp and intermittent fasting. Because what my students have found is they're eating the way they need to eat, the foods that they need to eat within a window of time. And so it ends up being, in all that I've talked about, it ends up being really the best of both worlds, in that maybe they're following a gluten-free, maybe they're following a ketogenic, but they're doing it within the time frame of intermittent fasting, and they end up losing weight and increasing energy and focus as a result. Even though intermittent fasting is a way to get your body into ketosis, which is a fat burning process, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a ketogenic diet. There's a big difference. We are getting into ketosis, fat burning, because of the timing and the window of time that we're fasting versus eating high fat, moderate protein, low carbohydrate. There is a difference, even though both ways get you into a state of ketosis. The third way to get into ketosis or fat burning is through supplemental ketosis. And again, I've mentioned this on previous Facebook Lives and podcasts, that the nutritional ketosis products I've tried, and I'm not convinced that they just don't work for me. And I haven't worked with enough clients with them yet to really give, again, my stamp of approval on supplements and products that are meant to put you into what's called nutritional ketosis. So the jury is still out on that one, okay? But I do want to encourage you, what have we talked about? Figuring out what you actually eat in the course of a few days, 2 weekend days, 1 weekday. Journal it, put it into an app. Look at what your macronutrient breakdown is for carbs, proteins, and fats, okay? Start with a foundation of vegetables, meats, fruits, and look at adding in and changing one variable. One example of changing a variable might be, I'm gonna increase my fat intake and decrease my carb intake. Then do that for 1 week, see how you feel, okay? If you find that you've increased in energy, you're feeling good, and you're good there, then stay. If you don't feel any different, but you're kind of leaning toward tweaking that a little more, maybe you increase fat a little more, and it might be an indicator that you try out a ketogenic diet. Again, if you don't like your palate and how that feels in the foods that you're eating, then I would shift back to a higher protein diet. overall, reaching out to a nutrition professional, a nutrition coach, a personal trainer with a background in nutrition, a registered dietitian, they're going to be able to guide you toward which step to do when and what foods that might include. Okay? So, if you're really interested in all the books that I have too, I'm happy to list them in the comments below. They will be in the podcast notes as well, but I'm sitting here literally with stacks of my books. Here's The Calorie Myth this is from Jonathan Baylor. This is all about maybe eating some more, doing less cardio, and actually losing weight. I have a podcast on that. Healing with Whole Foods. This has been just a game changer with regard to clients with Hashimoto's and any kind of thyroid disorders. Paul Pitchford. But I'm just a voracious reader, and I can't help myself. I would love to research nutrition for you guys. So, like I said, I'll put the titles of all the books that I have on nutrition in the episode notes and in the comments below. I will put a link to Fast Camp. We're starting in, let's see, it's less than 2 weeks now. We're starting Sunday, September 16th. And if you have questions about that, we'll be doing a Facebook Live coming up next week in preparation for that. So I really encourage you to just make the most of the foods that you're eating. Find foods that are full, that are nutrient dense, that are nourishing. An avocado as compared to, I don't know, a bag of Cheez-Its. An avocado as compared to even an RX bar. I'd rather you eat real food versus even a healthy packaged food, okay? And let's just take a look at some of the questions. If you have questions, throw them my way. Samantha says that journaling helps a lot. Agree. And hormones will throw everything out of whack. That is true. And I would suggest, just kind of on that note with hormones, that for women specifically, if you are either pre-postmenopausal, you need to take that into consideration. If you're premenopausal and you still have that cycle, know that just prior to your cycle starting, you're going to see such changes in, foods that you're craving, your hunger level, and even weight gain. I personally, when I'm coming up on a menstrual period, I will gain 5 pounds. I will crave more sugar. And that is just a hormonal response to where I'm at, right? And I need to be aware of that. If nothing else, if you know that you're going to get your period and you're going to crave a ton of sugar and you don't want to completely demolish your metabolism for the month, just that awareness and knowing what you're probably going to feel, you can combat that by drinking more water, getting more sleep, and nourishing your body in different ways so that you don't then rely on sugar in those ways to gain energy and feel better. One option, okay? So any other questions coming in, guys, feel free to message them here. I like to go back through our Facebook Live broadcasts and our podcasts, and I'm happy to answer them later. If you're viewing this later, I will also get back to you and answer those questions. So it's been perfectly real and awesome to have you all, and I just wish nothing but great health for you. Have an awesome day, and I'll talk to you all soon.